We all want and stand for on this government.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Bill Goff.
Mr. Speaker, the member who just resumed his seat said that New Zealanders are concerned about housing affordability. Of course they are, because the statistics, Dr. Smith, that came out 2 weeks ago showed that New Zealand has become, in the last few years, one of the countries with the least affordable housing for low-income people. And this government, Mr. Speaker, is at the start of its 5th year in office. And this minister says he's now working on some plans to deal with the housing crisis. The housing crisis, Mr. Speaker, has been there for 5 years. Young people cannot get into their first home unless they have help from their parents. And this government has sat on the sidelines, it's twiddled its thumbs, it's done nothing, while house prices have soared, rents have gone up, and we have a crisis of housing shortage and affordability. It's the 5th year of this party in government. And I remember the first year where we had a job summit. The job summit that turned out to be exactly what I said, Mr. Speaker, a job fest. And the cycle way, John Key said, that's going to produce thousands of jobs. How many did it produce? A couple of hundred, Mr. Speaker. A couple of hundred. And I want to talk about the reality of jobs. I opened a new supermarket, Countdown in Stoddard Road in Mount Roskill, the day after Waitangi Day. Lovely new supermarket, great manager, Mike Urey, and 120 jobs. 120 jobs, Mr. Speaker. I was really pleased to have 120 new jobs in my electorate. But I said to Mike, how many people, Mike, applied for those jobs? Mr. Joyce, do you know what the answer to that question was? 2,600. 2,600 people applying for 120 relatively low-paid jobs in my electorate. That's the reality of the legacy of stuff-ups in providing jobs and skill training and getting the economy going in this country. I remember John Key saying in 2009, next year we'll move aggressively towards dropping unemployment. The latest figures, Mr. Speaker, the latest figures last week, in the last quarter of last year, there was a net loss of 23,000 jobs. We had the lowest level of labour force participation, Mr. Joyce, in 10 years. This government has failed, and it's failed in every way. What about the restructuring and the mismanagement of that in foreign affairs? Did they accept responsibility? No. Murray McCully bravely blamed his head of department. And then there was the Defence Force. 22.6% attrition last year, Mr. Joyce, in the Navy in Auckland. 22.6%, the lowest morale in the ongoing attitude survey since that survey began. But I want to talk about another couple of botch-ups. There's the education botch-up. What did I hear John Key say? Hekia Parata is one of the smoothest communicators in politics. Well, you might have some thoughts about that, Mr. Speaker. 5 times today you asked her to answer the question and she never did. If the Prime Minister is going to be sacking incompetent ministers, that's why apparently he sacked Phil Heatley and Kate Wilkinson without the respect of even letting them know in advance to show that he was the tough guy. Why did he leave Hekia Parata and Craig Foss in their position? Surely the least competent ministers, not only in the House now, but as long as I can remember. Novo Pay. Yeah, you're meant to be the fix-up man, Mr. Joyce, but why did the stuff-up happen in the first place? Why did 3 ministers sign off on that program? Why can't she answer the questions? Why is she closing schools in Christchurch, adding to the trauma of people affected by the earthquake? Why did she close the Salisbury school when the court ruled her illegal? Why did she try to increase class sizes when the Prime Minister said in the Listener that he sent his kids to private schools because they had lower class sizes, and then said to everybody else, oh, it won't affect you? A total botch-up in education It's not good enough. It's not fair on our kids and the future we want to provide for them. But I want to touch on another botch-up now, and this was first raised in the House by my colleagues Clayton Cosgrove and Damien O'Connor. And it was the botch-up over the handling of the issue of contamination of our dairy products by DCD. Now let's get one thing right at the start, Mr. Speaker. DCD is not a health or food safety issue. It's not a health or food safety issue. But, Mr. Joyce, it is a contamination issue. And it's an issue about reputation and about branding. And we go out into the world, as I did for years as Trade Minister, proudly promoting this country as 100% pure New Zealand. And this issue came along, and for 4 long months after Fonterra realised it was a problem, nothing happened. Nothing was said by this government until the contamination was released to the public by a media article in the Wall Street Journal. And I feel sorry for our ambassador in Beijing, Carl Worker, a competent diplomat. And what did Mr. Walker have to say? He was clearly left out of the loop. 4 months after this government knew about the problem, he was forced to go out and say it was quote-unquote regrettable that New Zealand did not forewarn Chinese authorities, which led to, he said, quote, confusion and unnecessary doubt, end quote. Mr. Speaker, I remember when we had the melamine crisis and the San Lu company, and I tell you, our cabinet came together within 24 hours in an emergency meeting and had informed the Chinese authorities within that time frame. We headed off a disaster, we headed off a crisis, because it was New Zealand Inc. It was ministers working together, talking to each other. I want to know, Mr. Speaker, when the Minister of Primary Industries told the Minister of Trade and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then I want to know why none of them said anything publicly until they were forced to, because it was revealed publicly. In fact, Clayton Cosgrove was responding to things the Minister should have been responding to 5 days before the Minister would even make a comment. And I say this, why did the Chinese government and the Chinese public learn about the problem only through an article in the Wall Street Journal which described the contamination as toxic, which it wasn't toxic, but the perception was left that it must have been because New Zealand had tried to cover it over? Why weren't we open and transparent? Why weren't we proactive about this problem so we could have headed it off and stopped any damage? China's our biggest market. I fought hard to get a free trade agreement with it. We've trebled our exports to that country, and I don't want to see the proud legacy of a Labor government trampled upon by an incompetent national government that can't handle these issues right. CCTV, Central China Television, has an audience of millions, hundreds of millions. They were running this, headlining it as a scandal. Weibo, which is China's Twitter, ran thousands of postings from people expressing concern. And they ran a survey where over half of the respondents said they didn't trust and they weren't sure about the quality or safety of New Zealand dairy products. That should never have happened. It didn't need to happen, and a competent government would have prevented it happening. Let's look at what BioPure Health said. They're one of the Kiwi exporters. They said it was a public relations disaster for this government. A public relations disaster. That's a frontline company. They said that their products, which had been doubling in value and sales every week, went to zero. Went to zero. And there's another company, New Image, it's a baby formula exporter. They said the industry was in damage control and they blamed the government for the lack of warning. And I want to say this, I hope that this problem can now be contained. It's in all of our interests as New Zealanders that it is. But surely the Prime Minister John Key and this incompetent national government needs to learn the lessons from it. Be proactive, have a strategy, be open and transparent, head it off, and protect New Zealand's interests. That's the responsibility of a government, and this national government failed in that responsibility.